Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Happy New Year, happy 2021. And I'm extremely happy to have my very first guest of 2021 is Carmina, who is currently in France, but actually lives between France and the UK. I've known Carmina for many, many years. She's a great friend of my sister, who's another awesome character, and maybe I get her on one day. But they met, I think, teaching way back in what seems like many years ago, back in Brighton, I think. So I'm going to let Carmina introduce herself first, and then we're going to crack on with the podcast, with Win Building. So Carmina, why don't you say who you are, what you're about, and what you're up to in the world at the moment?
Hi, Nick. So, yes, it keeps cutting, but thank you very much for having me. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm very happy to be on this podcast. This is my first English podcast. I've done some French ones before, so I hope that it'll be okay, that my English will be okay mainly. So, yeah, as you said, I'm half French, half English. My mum's English and my dad is French. And I have met your sister about 20 years ago. We were both teaching at St. Giles. We were both in very similar situations because we were both single moms at the time, both with very young children who have now grown to be, my son is 20 and Zia is 19, and they're both at uni. And they are really good friends with their ups and downs, almost like brothers and sisters. So what can I say about me? So I'm bilingual. I've always been fascinated about language acquisition, about bilingualism, about languages in general, language and culture. I've been teaching for about 20 years, but I've had my own company for about 10 years, and I've started with teaching in France, and then teaching adults online, and now I've got my baby, which is Hipe Kids, which is teaching children online, and all my teachers are in England, all over the world, native teachers, and teaching French children for the moment, and hopefully in the future teaching children from all over the world.
Awesome. So tell me a bit more about Hype Kids. I want to know all about Hype Kids. I mean, I have done a bit of research, but I want my audience to know about Hype Kids. So tell us a bit more about that. Where did the idea come from? How did you develop it? And where is it at right now?
Okay, so Hype Kids, the way it started is I started teaching 20 years ago, as I said, and I discovered English exams when I was teaching at St. Giles, and I thought they were really interesting, but they were so different from the way that we teach in France. So when I went to France and decided to start teaching Cambridge exams in France, I realized not many French people knew about Cambridge at the time. So I approached Cambridge and they said to me, actually, you've got a master's in applied linguistics, you're bilingual, you've been teaching for so many years, why don't you come and work for us? So I started teaching as a Cambridge English consultant, not teaching, sorry, working. So what I was doing is going around France, going to schools, talk about the exams, teaching teachers how to teach, especially French teachers, because we've got a completely different technique in France. And what I realized is there was a great need for that way of teaching, which is the communicative approach, totally different from the grammar way that we do in France. And but what happened was that I moved to France when my son was 11, and I said to Kylan, you have to stay with me for a year. Give yourself a chance to see if you like it or you don't. And he was like, no, Mum, I want to go back to England. So I found myself having my company in France and a job in France, and my son wanting to go back to England. So what happened is that I ended up going 1 week in France, 1 week in England. And the only way I could do this was to have my clients and my students online with me. So I had the company online, the teaching and the consulting in France. And I realized that actually it's not the adults that need to learn English, although there is still a great need, but it's the children. And I then came up with this idea of teaching the children online in 2018. I did what we called a hackathon. So it's not to learn a marathon of doing the hacker, as someone said to me. No, it's which I thought was very
Down in
funny.
New Zealand.
Yeah, no, it was like, yeah, I thought that was a very funny thing. But no, it's through 2 days where you don't sleep at all in the evening, at all. So you don't sleep, and for 2 days you create a company online, like a pretend company, and then that's passed in front of judges, and I won the most innovative idea of the hackathon. So I was really pleased with that. And I then approached Midi, who had been working with me for a while, doing bits and pieces. And I said to him, look, I've got this idea of teaching online with children. What do you think? And he's an engineer. he's a young engineer and he has an MBA also. And he was like, okay, I'll quit everything I'm doing and let's go for it. So we went from there. And in 2018, we already had clients. We had no logo, no website, but clients. And we just started. And really, we went with nothing. And 2 years later, so we are entering our third year. We've got almost 300 clients, so families actually, so with 1 to 3 children. And we've got about 10 teachers. I train the teachers as we go along. And it's, the parents and the children are super happy. So that's where we are now.
That's awesome. And I guess there's something positive finally we can say with the coronavirus, maybe that helped, that may have helped your business a little bit. I mean, I guess I don't want to be saying that you were benefiting from misfortune, but it's a great timing in terms of like setting up something online. I think people now are recognizing that a lot more things can be done online and effectively online as well, and they've sort of been shaken awake by this pandemic, but you clearly saw an opportunity in advance, which is great. And it
is, but the problem is that everyone's going online now, so we really had to up our game and really make a difference from the others. But there are two things that are happening. On the one hand, it's working really well. Parents are super happy. We have been in the game for a while, but on the other, there is a general kind of feeling at the moment where people have had enough of Zoom. They've had enough of everything. People don't have as much money as before. So it's trying to find a right way, and the way we're moving towards is to try and make our courses as cheap as possible so we can help everyone. So that's one of the things we're doing. We're pivoting at the moment to try and do monthly subscriptions. And we're looking forward to see how this works, because we know we're going to be able to help a lot more families doing that and have this positive impact in at the moment, which is what is needed, I think, with what's going on.
I love that. And so I'm going to jump straight into kind of the theme of the podcast, which is win building. And part of that is like adapting your strategy based on the competitive environment. In fact, you said the game, which most people don't talk about the game. And I often talk about the game, even in business. It's like, understand what game you're in. And I think that's one of the things that's impressed me about you since I've known you, is you've been one of these people who has always been a bit of a... I've always seen you as someone who has been looking to get ahead. Has been ambitious. Would you describe yourself as ambitious? Would you agree with that? And like, is that something you've recognized?
So it's an interesting word. In France, being ambitious is almost a swear word. Like you know, if you say that you're it's really weird, because people feel really awkward about saying that they want to be ambitious. One of the things, as a parent, for example, I want my son to have expectations. I want him to be ambitious, because if he's not going to go anywhere. I think setting your goal is important. If you and it's also important because you need to believe in yourself to do that, and that's very difficult, I think, to do so. But being ambitious doesn't mean making lots of money, or it doesn't mean to be at the head of a massive company that makes millions. Being ambitious is to have dreams. That's what it is, and not be afraid of having dreams. For me, that's how I see it. And I've never wanted to let anything that happens to me or to others, stop me from having dreams. So I think having dreams is really important. And it's all about knowing how to get there. You know, planning is really important. It's actually quite difficult to plan also.
So long and short, yes, you're ambitious.
yes, I am. Yes,
but not in the negative French way.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. No, I think I totally agree. And in fact, when I think of ambition, it's funny. I don't even think about like being rich or having, being at the top of a company or whatever. I think I agree. I completely agree with you on your philosophy there. Having dreams, ambitions, having an ambition and aiming for it. I mean, we talk about goals, we talk about ambition, we talk about dreams. It's aiming yourself in a direction and trying to get there, and having a desire to do that. I think that is what I see in you, and I think I can relate to the French part. I was going to say maybe we should try and talk in French, but then I was like, actually, my French is awful.
I'm sure it's fine.
But I am ambitious to learn more French. No, but I think I think having dreams, and also it's interesting you say about wanting your son to believe in himself and have dreams and things. So in a way, you want your son to be ambitious, want him to do something, but the cultural side is of the term maybe is what's holding you back. But your so when you talk about your own story coming up, you said about having worked for 20 years as or was it 20 years as a teacher, or a long time as a teacher, and then you set up the company, and you've continued to teach, but on that higher level, you're teaching teachers now and things. With that, have you sort of picked up any philosophies in terms of like helping people to get better, helping to people to achieve their dreams, achieve their goals? Because obviously teaching is all about goal setting and achieving those goals as well. So have you found that yourself developing a philosophy around that, and is there any philosophies that you particularly like around that?
I think that's a very good point. One of the things, so my son's he's decided to go for business and management, and one of the things I wanted him to do in order to go in business and management, and actually to help me with his fees for his university, was for him to learn to teach. Because you're right, in order to learn, I think to be a good business person, I think you have to also be a good teacher. You need to be able to pass on. In order to be in management, you need to be able to pass on, and that's super important. And in order to pass on, there's one thing that you need to understand is the other. What is the other like? How do they work? How do they function? What do they like? What do they not like? And I think that's really important, because if you understand how people work, you can therefore adapt your teaching accordingly. So that's really looking into teaching. And one of the things that I've realized, and that's interesting also, because having been brought up in France, where if you're not good, teachers will tell you, and they will go on and on and on about it. It forces you to be really good at something, but if you don't have that kind of mentality, and if you feel like if you don't take, criticism well, it can be really a downer. One thing that works is actually telling people they're good at something. It just takes them everywhere. So, for example, in teaching, if you understand the person in front of you and you know what they are good at, you will adapt your teaching to what they're good at. So I'll give you an example. I've got students that are dyslexic, and dyslexic is not a teaching difficulty. It's a learning. It's just learning differently. And it's just thinking, okay, they don't learn this way. I'm going to find a different way for them to learn. I think you can adapt this to everything. What it is, it's just like there is always, and it's something I've always said to people around, there's always a solution. There's always a solution to all problems. There's always a solution. It's just finding it. So I think that's my philosophy, and I never let go of anything. I'm like, okay, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. There is always a solution. What is the solution? And you always find one. And sometimes you can't find it for a while. It just takes some time, but you can find it at some point.
I 100% agree. Again, I was going to say that a lot, I think, but no, I totally agree, and I think that. But what's interesting is, I think possibly you take for granted that you're looking for that solution, and you're interested to understand that solution, interested to actually achieve the result from the solution. I think a lot of people have fallen at that point. They're just, they either aren't interested in finding a solution, or they haven't got the energy for it, or they don't have that optimism or that positive attitude towards it. And that is something that distinguishes someone like yourself from those people, and allows you to be successful, and or helps you to be successful. And I think that's probably, I would guess, linked to the entrepreneurial ambitions that you have and things. Would you agree on that?
Totally. I think one of the words we talk a lot about when I go and do the different startups hubs that I do is we talk about growth mindset. And I think growth mindset is vital. You can have someone, and I've got examples around me, someone who's very intelligent, but will never do anything with that intelligence, because they think that they are born intelligent, and they think it's given to them, and that's the way it is, and full stop. And you've got people that are maybe not as intelligent, but have a very big growth mindset. They know that they can acquire whatever they want, because they know it's possible. And it's believing in it's possible. It's just finding how to do it, and finding a completely different approach sometimes. Something you didn't think about at all, but it's by talking to people around you. And sometimes it takes a lot of talking to a lot of people until you're like, I've got it. I found a solution, and the solution is completely different. I'm going to give you an example, and this example stayed with me but for years, and I tell it to everyone. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're boring with your story." But when I was in Maribel, um, I used to go. Well, I worked in Maribel for 2 years as
For those that don't know, Maribel is a ski
oh yeah,
resort in France, in the French
and then
Alps.
you did too.
and
You
and
worked in a ski resort, didn't
yeah,
you?
and Carmina loves to snowboard, right? As
Yeah,
well.
I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So sorry, just to
No,
give context.
and I was in a lift, and I was talking to this guy, and it's one of those. It's the biggest one. It's La Solière, I think. It's the biggest lift that goes up to the top to the biggest hill down. It's about a good 10 minutes boarding down, which is really nice. And I was in this bubble going up the bubble is in French, the ski lift. And I was talking to this guy, and I'd stopped university, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I talked to this guy, and he was telling me about him and how he'd stopped school at 14, and he always wanted to be a pilot, and stopped school at 14, didn't know what to do. He went into started working doing some I think it was some woodworks, and started working like doing a bit more like making benches and stuff like that. Really got into it, really enjoyed it. Did what we call a not traditional baccalaureate, but like a manual baccalaureate. Really enjoyed this and thought he was doing quite well. Continued, did a bit more studies, and he opened his own company like 3-4 years later, made quite a lot of money. And he said to me, and I made so much money that I ended up taking my pilot license. And he said to me, I am here today in Maribel, and I came with my own plane. And I was like, oh my God, he's a pilot. It's different, but he's a pilot. And that story, and I don't know who this guy is, I don't know if you'll ever hear me, but this story really was the beginning of thinking everything is possible. You don't have to go the average way. You can go a different way.
Yeah.
And I always think of that pilot who came in his little plane, to Maribel, because there is a place where you can land in Maribel, and he came with his own plane. So he's a pilot.
God, that's so cool.
That is quite cool, isn't it?
Yeah, that is extremely cool. It makes me think of Sergey Brin, who's one of the guys who founded Google. Apparently, I heard this story and I loved it. It's similar kind of thing. So he has a private jet. All those guys fly around in their private jets all around the world. But apparently, he learned how to do high altitude, low opening skydives, so he could jump out of his private jet and land next to his boat, instead of having to land in an airport and get all the
That's pretty cool.
out to his boat. I was like, oh my God, that's just different level. That's so cool. But I think I just to go back to it, I think the possibilities and again being I don't have a problem with the word ambition, so I would say being ambitious or understanding, having a hunger to be better, having a hunger to do something more, to improve oneself. And in fact, having the guts to do it. So the final thing is be brave and execute. In my book, it's like be brave and execute. You've got to actually do the thing in the end. It doesn't matter about like constructing a win and making sure your business is absolutely perfect on paper. And at some point you actually have to say, right, now we're going to go to business. Now we're going to start taking this team to this tournament or whatever it is. And you've got to actually try and do it. And clearly that guy took the opportunity to learn how to be a pilot. He could have just sat with the money in the bank and never actually chased that dream down. So I think it's great. I think it's a great thing. And that's also why I think I invite people like you on, people who have been brave to take steps, even in the face of pretty big challenges. So I wanted to jump back to that as well, because being a single mum and having little kid and being setting up businesses and being in 2 different countries as well, like you described, that must be extremely challenging. And the strength and sort of tenacity that comes alongside that, I'm sort of fascinated by that. I obviously watch my sister, who is also an awesome character and has had some big challenges herself in life, and as you mentioned, is also a single mum. And I'm so impressed with the way you guys have sort of raised these 2 young, awesome little dude and dudettes and kept your lives on track and and managed to succeed as well. So where do you think that strength comes from? Where do you think that tenacity or perseverance comes from? And do you like step back and recognize it yourself sometimes, or do you just not have a chance to do that?
No, I think no, I do step back a lot, and I think a lot of us do as moms, as entrepreneurs, as workers, as everything. I think if you don't step back and if you don't look back, you can't go forward.
Hmm.
It's very important to constantly look back and think, okay, one, would I change something? I think to most of these questions, I wouldn't. There's a few things I would change, some things in my life, just a few, but most of it I wouldn't. And I think
Hmm.
even the bad things that have happened to me have helped me to become stronger and kind of like have made me, yeah, more resilient. And I think the word resilient is grit is the most important one. So sometimes you have resilience in you. Sometimes it's it comes along as life throws you stuff, and you have to kind of learn to deal with it. I'm not sure how resilience work. I think it's a very important thing as a parent to put into your children and to teach them. So if you fall over, stand up. It's okay. Okay, I'll blow on your boo boo, as we say in French,
Yeah.
your wound, and
Ouchie.
then yeah, your ouchie, and then you can get to stand up, and it will get better eventually. And I remember my son being bullied, for example, when he came to France, and it was really, as a parent, it's really, really hard to see. But what I said to him, it was awful because I didn't really know how to. And apart from going over there and actually slapping the child, you don't really know what you can do as a parent. And I said to him, do you want me to go to the school? Do you want me to talk to the child? He was like, no, mum. And I said, darling, unfortunately, this will happen at one point in your life. If it's not now, it will be later. And if you learn to deal with it now, then it'll be okay. And it's been so true. And he said it to me also. It's like, actually, I can look now, I can look back at that time and think, yeah, you were right. It's difficult, but we have to just get over it. And at some point, we all have to face that. Some kind of bullying at one point or the other in your life. Of course, it's, you do get help from people. So Tash has been amazing with me, for example. Having her with me in my life has been an amazing, having people like you that can go and do. So we've, as single moms with no money, we were both teachers part-time. We've traveled to loads of places with our kids under the arm, like slept all four of us in one room in Madrid, and we've had some amazing time. We went snowboarding with Zia breaking her leg in the middle of it. We've just done it all, and because what we would say is like, okay, we have no money, do you want to go snowboarding? Yes, I do. Book the holiday and we'll find a way to do it with the kids, and we did.
Yeah.
And it's been resilient, definitely. We have gone over the problems that we found, and we sometimes it takes longer, but we know that we'll get over it at one point or the other. uh, Being a single mom is difficult, but it's also got its perks because you're a single person, but you're also a whole person, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's as I said, I'm in awe of it, but I think it's so impressive what you achieve. I think the perks. That's probably you being very optimistic. I would say being a team and being able to kind of hand off and go, I've had enough. I got to go and sit down for 5 minutes, and I've got to go and take a shower. It's definitely a luxury that every now and then my wife and I look at each other and we're like, wow, we are so lucky. Let's not mess this up, because there is a danger we will mess it up, of course. And so we're like, let's try and be a team for a bit longer at least.
No, I
So
totally agree. I think there are perks actually to both sides, and there are perks in every situation, like having only one child or having two. I only had one. I wish I had two. Maybe, I don't know. But actually, having one, you can only concentrate on one. Having two, they've got a brother and sisters. I've got a brother and a sister, and I'm really happy having them.
yeah,
But being on your own, it's not a choice, but being two, it's good also. I think there are perks to every situation. Once again, I am quite optimistic, and it's just looking and going, okay, this is the situation. What are the good points of this situation, and how can I make the most of it?
yeah. I was about to say optimism is everything, because the glass half full attitude, and the fact that you look at the positive sides and don't always just see the negative. I think if you're looking at the positives and focusing on them, then you get further along the line in terms of positive growth mindset. I think we're I'm sure everybody listening knows someone who's always in that negative. Everything. I mean, I remember an ex-girlfriend of mine. She was like, "Everything bad happens to me," and it's always stuck with me. So she said, "I was like, really? Everything bad happens to you?" I'm like, this is not particularly fun right now. Like to be with someone who's got that much negativity wrapped up, and I think that flipping that is, it's difficult, right? Because life does throw up challenges. And I think something I wanted to bounce back to as well was, it's interesting to me how so many really, really successful people have kind of come from nothing or have lost everything and had to rebuild, you know. And there's been a lot of examples of very successful entrepreneurs who've kind of done it from like zero money or minus lots of money, and they've managed to somehow get there because they believed in something and they just chased a dream. And I think the interesting thing for me is sometimes when you don't have an option, that's, you know, when you don't have a safety blanket to fall into, then you just have to. And that doesn't make it easy, and it doesn't make it something that's a foregone conclusion. But if you're stripped of that safety blanket, then you have to risk failing. And again, we talk about, well, I talk about failing in the book, and I think embracing the fail. With a few of the guests I've had on, we talked about failing and how you've got to embrace the fail, embrace the suck, if you like. And I wanted to ask you about that as well. It's like some of the challenges you face where you've really sort of, you say you wouldn't change things, but like, what are the big things you've learned from where it's like, oh shit, that didn't go well at all, or I really wish that we'd managed to change that outcome?
So the one I always take, it's always the same one. I did, so because me being me, I did 150,000 things at the same time. And one of them was doing my master's while I was working and being a single mum. So all of it at the same time. And I was working in a school, doing my master's at the same time, and I had the summer off, and I decided to work during the summer also so I could make more money, so I could obviously do the things I wanted to do. And I took a week off, the last week off, to finish my master's. The problem is something came up. Someone came up to me and I was like, you know, because I'm a really keen climber. And we're all going to Czech Republic to go climbing, and they've got a special way of climbing. And I was like, oh no, I've taken the week off to go and do my master's. And of course, I ended up going climbing. And every single places I went with my master's under my arm so I could work, which I didn't, of course. I did only half of it. So I worked like 1 or 2 hours on my master's. And I passed, but I didn't pass with flying colors. I passed, and that's one of my regrets. I wish I'd worked more, especially now that I know what it entails in order to get a good grade, like how you can get a good grade, how easy it is if you work properly. I'm like, okay, I wish I'd known that before, and I wish I'd spent more time. However, I would not go back on my holiday because I had an amazing climbing trip. So it's one of those, it's like, okay, but if I regret this and I take it away, what do I lose with it? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know, like just to have an amazing grade in my master's, would I lose this holiday? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure.
It's a point of personal pride, I guess, in terms of the grade. But in the end, not that many people really care. I mean, if you're applying to Google, I guess they care about grades a lot and they look for your GPA average and everything else. But in the end, like, it doesn't really matter. And the life experience alongside that you have when you do these adventures, and like you said, you had a great time. I think you gain a lot there. I would say that is not a good example of failing, Carmina.
Well, failing.
If you want my professional judgment on your fail story, that's it.
I don't know. The thing is, it's difficult to see what is failure, because I find failure so, like in climbing, for example, and I think climbing for me, I take climbing examples all the time. You cannot, it's not possible to get depending obviously which level you're going for, but if I want to try and get like a 6C, I'm going to try and climb a 6C, it's almost impossible for me to have it first time around. I have to go up and fall, and it's only through those falls that my body will remember the right movement, the correct movement to get it, and eventually I will get there. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's one of my best mates and who's my climbing mate, and he was saying to me, he looked at the big climbers, which obviously I'll never be one of them, because in order to become one of them, I would have to work a lot more, and I don't have the time, at least not for now. But what they do, they never climb an 8C in one go, never. No, what they do is they sit, they go up, they come down, they try, they fall, they come down. And I think that's the same about life. So, failing is, my company didn't work. My first company didn't work super well, but I've learned a lot from it. So I stopped the company. I didn't fail. I went and started another one. So I don't know how to say.
I'm going to
failing in that
interrupt
one.
you. I think your climbing analogy is an excellent example of fail. I think that's perfect, and it's a great example actually, especially using the grading. Because I was going to ask you about climbing, and I wanted to ask you about vertigos as well, and hopefully we
Yeah.
can talk about that in a second. But I think the climbing analogy is brilliant because there are different grades at which you can achieve, and you can aspire for that 6C, for example, and work towards it. And you know where you're at, and you know what you can achieve, and you know what's possible. So you do it incrementally. So it goes 6C, and once you become familiar with that, and depending on your ambition and your ability to put time in to get and build the strategy around getting there, will then define whether or not you can get 7C or 8C. I'm
Well,
actually
70,
not
not sure,
super
but
familiar with the grades. I did climb a lot when I was younger, but I've forgotten all the grades. But yeah, I was thinking about Free Solo, that film. I don't know if you've seen it
yeah,
on Netflix with Alex
I have.
Holland. Oh my god! And he climbs this what is it called? Captain El Capitan,
Yeah.
Free Solo. But yeah, it showed in the video like how many times he practiced it and how he knew just every moment of every grip everywhere along the route to be able to do it. And I think, when I talk to certain people about that film, they don't want to watch it because they're like, what a reckless guy, just going out there and he's basically suicidal. And it's like, if you watch it, he's not suicidal at all. He's just
No.
living on a completely different plane, with an ambition or dream or goal or whatever you want to call it, of achieving something extremely rewarding and satisfying to him. And that's what he's doing. And so maybe it is selfish because people around him would grieve him. However, that's how he's chosen to live his life, and it's quite transparent in the way he lives his life.
Yeah.
So I guess he's managing expectations.
Absolutely. And then the thing is, there's no secret. He didn't, achieve what he did just by looking at it and thinking, oh, I want to do this and I want to have that. No, he worked at it again and again and again. I mean, how many years? I think it's 3 years it took him, or 2 years it took him to do it. So, and he knew every single movement on that climb, every single one of them. And that's why he was able to finish it and do it properly. A lot of people say climbing is dangerous, but driving a car is dangerous. But I find going in a plane is dangerous. I don't know if it's a 40-year-old thing, but I'm really scared of planes at the moment, and I'm on planes all the time. But I find it more dangerous to be on a plane sometimes. My body thinks it's more dangerous to be on a plane than it is to climb, because when you're climbing, you know what you're doing. I know I'm in control of what I'm doing. That's why I like it, and I'm in control of me. So if anything happens, I am therefore responsible, and I think that's a great part of you were talking about. What makes us achieve or not. I think it's being responsible, taking your own responsibility. And when you're climbing, you're taking your own responsibility. When you're in a plane, you're not. It depends on everyone else and the captain and the plane and everything, and that's quite dangerous.
I think the funny thing that's popped into my head while you were saying it is it's risk, right? I mean, it's understanding risk, it's assessing risk well. Mm-hmm. And my wife always says to me, I'm not good at assessing risk, or she's better at assessing risk. And that mainly relates to me being a daddy and her being a mommy, and daddy being a little bit more how should I put it, rough with the kids in terms of like allowing them to jump from things that mummy wouldn't let them jump from, for example. So we've had a few back and forths on that, because I used to work actually in sort of a risk management job. So I'm very good at managing risk and assessing risk. But I one of the reasons I love snowboarding as well, and I'm sure you feel the same, is that same feeling of like being in control of the board, understanding, being quite in the moment with the mountain, the snow, and your board, and that's really all you've got to worry about. I love that feeling, and I love the sort of zen moment you get when you're just all you're focused on is that and how you move your body and how you control that whole situation. I didn't like skydiving. I tried to learn to skydive, and I even got to the point where I pulled my own chute and flew myself down, but I didn't like it that much because I'm like, there's so much there's so much that could go wrong that means I'm definitely going to die.
I agree. It's I've only done it once, and I liked it, but I had someone with me, so it's not the same.
It's exciting, and I can get why people get really into it, and I definitely don't look down on people who do it, but for me it was just like one of those sports where I was like, okay, this is extremely this is an uncomfortable feeling. So let's get on back to climbing and Vertigirls. I want to hear about that because there's a is it a charity or a non-profit?
So I'm no longer part of Vertigirls, and I haven't been for a while. However, it's still working, and Vertigirls was created. Oh my God, I don't know, about 10 years ago, maybe more, by my friend Christine, who is fantastic. And Christine is one of those people that is really interesting because she will never let anything stop her. Never. She's been an inspiration for me because I've always looked up to her because she is one of the people who created Pret a Manger, and she's decided to stop. She's got problem with with her back and different kind of problems and stuff. And
so Pret a Manger is a store in, I think it's not just in the UK now, right?
I think it's all over the world.
All over. Okay, well, sorry then. Apologies. It's a very nice sandwich and coffee shop type place. Very big in the UK. Sorry to interrupt.
Maybe I'm hoping I've got the right name. I think that's the one. But anyway, so she was there right at the beginning, helping them with certain bits and pieces. But Christine is when I met her, I just started climbing and I just joined. Literally, I went climbing with whoever wanted to hold my rope. It was as simple as that. And that's how I met Christine and a lot of the people I went climbing and who are still my friends now and with whom I still go climbing. And she said to me that she wanted to create a charity that would help women with mental health issues and physical issues. And the reason why she wanted to do for women is that sometimes you need an environment where no one's going to judge you. And they felt like if maybe we were with guys, sometimes guys can be a bit more like boisterous, is that the word? Like something that was a bit more like where they felt more comfortable and I don't know, maybe not judged, etc. So we created Vertigirls. We helped her. There was me, Susanna, and Kristen was the one who created that. And what it does is literally it teaches women how to climb, but it also, and I think that's the point of climbing, it teaches them that you can overcome your fears. So, and take whatever long it will take you, it's just in your own time, in your own steps. And I thought that was fantastic because it did really help women that of all sizes, of all backgrounds, of all, because it's also a group, because it's in Brighton, we also have a kind of like all, not gender, because that was an issue at one point of how do you define, which is still how does one define gender in those roles? Who can you say can come or cannot come? So that was one of those things we were like, oh, it can be quite complex. But what it did is really helped women to overcome some of their fears. And that was amazing to see. So people who would not get off the ground at all actually be able to climb outdoors and climb a 4 or a 5 and go 20 meters, 30 meters, 50 meters high on their own, well, not on their own, with a rope, of course, leading a climb. So that was pretty interesting and intense.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I guess doing something worthwhile that's bigger than yourself and that you love is definitely a very good thing to have done in life. So you've stopped now because you're, I guess, too busy between two different countries.
I'm too busy between both countries, and also there's a point where I just actually wanted to climb for myself. I wanted climbing to be I didn't want it to be part of a work or anything like that. So I really wanted to be my thing, where it's the moment where I'm on my own, well, not on my own, but I'm on my own facing the rocks and I'm not taking responsibilities for other people, because that's the thing, if you're teaching people to climb, you have to be really careful they're doing everything well. So there's a lot of responsibility in doing so. But it was an amazing experience, and Vertigirls lives on its own anyway. And the idea was for people to take on. So Christine has let it to other people also. She comes back. She's still part of the Vertigirls. But what it does, it's new people come in, take ownership of Vertigirls, and pass it on to the next person, etc., etc.
That's cool. Okay, I wanted to ask a little bit about you and how you organize life around, because you were saying about how you're flying backwards and forwards all the time between the UK and France, and I guess especially in these days that must be a really weird experience given that everyone's masked up and we've got all the virus restrictions and things going on in the different countries. But how do you organize your life to kind of take stock, take a moment, take a beat, as my friend Rory was saying in the last podcast. Like, how do you get your life leveled, and what tools do you use? What sort of things do you do to give yourself the moments to relax and re-energize?
It's a very good question, because relaxing, well, climbing usually, or used to, because I'm not climbing anymore because obviously I can't go anywhere at the moment, helps me a lot with the energizing and relaxing. That's really my relaxing moment, is when I go climbing. What I've done is I've literally duplicated my life. I've got one life in England and one life in France. I've got my flat in England, and I live with boyfriend here in France, and I've got two of everything. So I've got, two sets of friends with whom I'm going climbing, two sets of toothbrush, makeup. I've got one computer. That's the only thing I've got one of, and one son, and one boyfriend only. And then I do two of everything. one is enough,
just in case he listens.
But no, it's really good, and actually it works for me. And it's funny, because I remember being little, being young. People said to me, "Oh, where do you want to live? Do you want to live in France, or do you live in England?" And I always said, "Oh, I'm going to live in both countries," and I've made it. I don't know how, but I have.
That's awesome, though.
But I do. You know what? My biggest tool is a Google Calendar. Oh my God, everything is in advance. I know when I'm in France. I know when I'm in England. I know. I book everything in advance, and now I know everything, all the tricks also. So, like for a long time I didn't have a car. All I did was just hire a car in France or hire a car in England. And you end up knowing all the little tricks of how to get it cheaper, how to fly cheaper, I have one suitcase and live with my suitcase backwards and forward. And it's really Google Calendar, my friend. I awesome. Live, if I lost my Google Calendar, I'd be like, oh my God.
I love that you said I have two sets of everything, and I was thinking coffee pots and things, and you're like, two sets of friends for climbing. I'm like, oh wow, I wonder if they get jealous of one another.
They've actually learned to know each other, because obviously I take my French friend in England, my English friends in France. But the one thing I've got that I really like is my phone. So, which is calling, it's my son trying to call me. I've got this phone, which is the One Plus, and it's got 2 SIM cards in it. One French one English one. And this is amazing. That's really helped me, because I do everything from my phone. And I've got the French, all my French setting on it and my English setting on it. So that's really useful also.
So you're not just bilingual, you're bilingual in technology as well. That's pretty impressive.
Bicultural, but yeah, I have to, because at one point it was quite complex when I had 2 computers. One was a French keyboard, and the other one was the English keyboard. And then I started, that didn't work for me, because you had to start writing one way, and then your brain's just going, no, this doesn't work. So no, one computer only.
I bought my wife, because she's left-handed, I bought her, I'm sharing the camera now, I bought her this left-handed, really fancy mouse for Christmas, thinking that would help her with her posture and everything, and she'd be really grateful for this fancy pants mouse. And she basically said the same thing. She's like, well, I've spent my whole career working with a right-handed person's mouth. Now, like, how am I supposed to change that now? So so that's going on eBay or the equivalent here.
So she's not using it at all.
No, she's like, I can't. It feels weird, and I'm like, oh, okay. I can relate as well, because I have an English keyboard, but I'm trying to learn Norwegian, and they have some extra letters in there in Norwegian. So now I'm having to plug those in as well and switch keyboard settings and just know where they are on my keyboard. So I'm familiar with that problem, but yes, it's definitely easier having one computer, I think. And
it was a nightmare when I did it. And it's like there's the moment where your brain just freezes, because you're in front of your hands. Then it's like, oh, it's not writing what I want it to write, and it's like, no, I can't do 2 keyboards. It doesn't work. So I think there must be something to do with like the kinesthetic thing and the brain working one way. It just doesn't. For me, it didn't work.
But it's also, we have in France they don't even have QWERTY, do they? They have the actual letter keys in completely different order.
Yeah, that's why. Right? Yeah. So it's AZERTY, as we say, and I can do QWERTY from time to time, but when I'm on AZERTY, I can't go back to QWERTY. It's
I have to be very careful. I love France, and I lived there for a while, as you know, and I do speak some French, or I used to speak quite good French, but I have to be careful because it is quite easy as an Englishman to make fun of French people sometimes, and their particular ways.
Well, they definitely have particular ways, and it's good to be French, so I can take the piss out of it sometimes.
Yeah.
But I do think it's great to have both views. It's really interesting to see, for example, how the French are reporting on the COVID compared to how the English are doing it. Because I'm like almost 1 week in each country, it's completely different, or on Brexit. So that's really interesting also.
How would you say? So I'm fascinated by that as well, because we were living in Hong Kong at the start of this whole thing. So a year ago we were living in Hong Kong, and we saw very early on what was happening in China, and immediately the Hong Kong people were like masked up, extremely vigilant. We were being temperature checked everywhere we went, like every building, you go to get a Starbucks, you get temperature checked as you make your order, because that was happening in like January last year. And they were just on it. And then of course watching from afar Europe, and we were listening, like my wife's Norwegian, we were listening to the sort of world press, or I guess BBC and things like that. And the World Health Organization was saying, masks aren't necessary and things. And we're sitting there in Hong Kong going like, why are they wearing masks? They're not necessary. The World Health Organization, we trust the World Health Organization. And then gradually, as we saw sort of Italy start to crumble, and various Spain went, and we were like, okay, maybe we'll wear the masks after all. Maybe there's something to this, And of course, now we've learned a lot more. But it was very interesting to then move to Norway, where at that point in July last year, the masks were not like people. If you wore a mask in the street, it was kind of sending a signal that you're ill. Therefore, you should be at home. So therefore, you shouldn't really wear a mask. And it was like this weird. If you wear a mask, you're saying something that you don't want to say, so you shouldn't wear a mask. And now it's changed a lot. Now, obviously, people are wearing masks all over the place. But it's been really interesting to see that progression. And of course, I went back to the UK briefly to see my mum in just before Christmas time, and spend a little bit of time there. I hadn't seen her for a year, and I didn't really go anywhere because I was in quarantine while I was there anyway. So I just stayed in the house. But I sort of saw, we walked outside, and I saw the attitude of people, and it was so interesting to see the differences, Hong Kong versus Norway versus UK, and just that difference in attitude. And I think watching the news and seeing what's going on in America, it's interesting again to see sort of attitudes and things there. But sorry for that monologue. What's your impression? Because I'm really interested to know about France as well, and how what their response has been, and how they view it all.
I think it's exactly what you're saying, exactly the same thing. In France at the beginning, they were like, no, do not buy any mask. We definitely do not need it. And actually, it's just that in reality, they didn't have any. So they were telling people not to buy them. And now, of course, everyone's wearing it and wearing a mask, etc. In England, it's weird because in France, where I live in Nice, everyone has to wear a mask on the street, inside the shops, everywhere. So the moment you leave your house, you have to wear the mask. In England, you don't. But at the moment, in England, we've got the new mutation. So it's a lot stronger. It's just very different mindsets. It's really interesting because you can see, if we want to come back to business, we can really see that this mindset is different about everything. We are different cultures. And my father said to me once, French or English are more different, for example, than French and, for example, an Arabic country. Because there's the Mediterranean in the middle, which sometimes makes them more similar, for example, Morocco, etc. But French or English are very different, and it's so true. And the approach even to masks, even to the approach towards Brexit is very different also. And even how Brexit is communicated in England is very different from the way it's communicated in France. So it's the whole thing is fascinating. For me, it's fascinating to live between both countries, and I think it's a massive plus for me as an entrepreneur to be between both countries, because I can see how the French work, I can see how the English work, and I'm like, okay, there's got to be a medium way that is my way.
Yeah, there's opportunities. I've been talking a lot about this to people. I think there's going to be so many opportunities coming out the back end of this, and obviously the tech billionaires have already taken advantage of some of those, but I think there's going to be a lot more things. There's a lot of people deluding themselves that everything's just going to go back to how it was and totally normal. And I'm like, I just don't believe that. I think that is delusional, because I think there's going to be some things which have changed forever with this, especially I think working from home and the way in which people have attitude towards that, and the ability to connect with people. I mean, we're doing this, you're in France, I'm in Norway, and we're connecting, and it's working pretty well, I'd say. But I think there's going to be a lot of things like that, and other things, training, teaching online, like you're doing. I think that's going to be, as you mentioned, there's a lot more people jumping on board, but it's also the technologies and things that are going to be available. One thing I think you've got well, and maybe we should sort of end with me giving you a giant compliment. I think you've got the idea of people still being at the forefront of what you do. Right. So teachers, and I said this a lot. I used to work in education for almost 14 years. I worked with an education company, as you know, and I always said it's the teacher that sits in front of the kid or the adult or whoever that is making all the difference. It doesn't really matter how good your company is, how good the technology is, if the person physically teaching the other person in front of them does not do the things you mentioned, try to understand the person, understand their needs, understand how they're responding in a learning capacity, then it all falls on its face. And vice versa, if the teacher is a great teacher, they can change lives. And I think that's been demonstrated time and time again. And maybe one day, the futurist in me says maybe one day technology gets good enough, AI gets good enough, it can respond in a way, see micro expressions and cater in that way. But at the moment, we're nowhere close. And I think what you have and what you're developing is a great product and a great tool for people to learn. So I encourage anyone listening to go and check out Hipe Kids right now.
With an I.
Hipe with an I, Hipe. And you can follow Carmina online. She's well, I'll post the links of where you can find her, but Hipe Kids is hipe.co.uk, right?
It's .com.
Oh,
we've changed it. Sorry.
Hipekids.com. Hipekids.com. HIPE kids.com. Yeah, go check it out. And thank you very much for listening. Carmina, thank you, Nick.
Thank you so much for having me.
For coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I wish you the very best with everything, including getting back to your 2 sets of climbing friends.
Maybe I'm not going to ask them to listen to this then.
Well, they might be jealous, but you can just you can tell me afterwards who the best ones are.
Okay, I will.
All right, thank you so much, Carmina.
Bye, Nick. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.